Sharon, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure and honor, and I always enjoy our time together. So we actually met on a beach in Punta Mita, and we were at an event and got to know each other and spend time together, and then we re-met up a few times at the family mastermind. And so today I want to kind of dig into the topic of partnerships throughout your career and journey. I have some notes here too. So you've written how many books?
29.
29 books. And are all of them on financial literacy or other topics too?
Building businesses, financial literacy, understanding money for women, for kids. My last one was How Money Works for Women, and before that, Exit Rich, which was Inc. magazine. So it talks about building the foundation of your business to take your successful business, making it sustainable, scalable, and saleable. So
amazing. So what is your first memory of coming across joint ventures and collaborations and things like that, and your kind of your first diving into that world?
Great question. I think I was a CPA, one of the very first women in public accounting, and so I had the benefit of seeing how companies succeeded, probably even more. I saw how businesses failed, and so I saw the power of joint ventures from that perspective. And then when I made the decision to leave public accounting is when I met Michael. My company sued one of his clients, so we met on opposite sides. We often tell people we met when he was going through my drawers because he really was doing discovery in my office, and so it was love at first sight. And so we were just sharing with Andre that I said, who won the court case? And it took me 20 years, but he now says,
I won in more than one way.
Good job, good job. But and he is an intellectual property attorney and an international expert in licensing. So that is his world. And so together we started building that type of joint venture. I'm all about power of association, is one of the things I always talk about. When I met the inventor of the first talking children's book, he was a friend of mine because we were both in the Cancer Society. So you learn association through everything that you do. Working in a nonprofit, you meet other people, you find things that you're aligned with, and you just look for the possibilities, which is what we're doing here, discover the opportunities that are there. And this was 1987. It's a hard time to remember that kids had no screens, they had no electronics. And so we had the very first electronic book. Some books, so many of you were raised on them, books with sound strips down the side. I started that industry in 1987. And how can parents trust us? We're this little company in West Allis, Wisconsin. And so we did deals with little companies like Disney, Warner Brothers, Sesame Street, Marvel Comics. And that's what allowed us to explode that around the world. And that was truly understanding the power of association, power of joint ventures. And everything I do is through the power of association and joint ventures.
That's amazing. Tell me more about your work with Napoleon Hill.
Okay, sure. Well, after I sold the Talking Children's book, I started Rich Dad. So that was in 1997, and I grew that for 10 years. I left that in 2007. And we know what was happening to the economy at that point in time. And I had, again, power of association. I knew the executive director of the Napoleon Hill Foundation because we would have booths next to each other at book fairs. And we got to be friends. Even though we were slightly in the same competitive environment, wonderful man. And he found out I left Rich Dad, and he called me in March of 2008 and said, most young people, and my definition of young is now under 50, he's going to get older, but don't know who Napoleon Hill is and have never heard of Think and Grow Rich. And we want to reinvigorate his teachings, and they asked me to step in and do that. So we were able to expand. People who know Napoleon Hill and Think and Grow Rich now probably didn't before 2008. And so I wrote 3 Feet from Gold. Somebody told me they just read it. Yeah, right, okay. 3 Feet from Gold, Outwitting the Devil. If you've not read that, I highly recommend it. Think and Grow Rich for Women and Success in Something Greater. But everything, again, there, it was introducing them to other organizations. So now they've got a deal with Russell Brunson. I made that connection, a deal with a movie, the Think and Grow Rich movie with Bob Proctor. So again, it's just a matter of connecting people where their 1 + 1 is 11, not 2. So.
Yeah, so what are one of the biggest lessons you've learned in leveraging partnerships, or examples of one of the partnerships that like just stood out to you as like a shooting star?
Well, Michael has a term that I love, and it said, no deal is better than a bad deal. So no deal is better than a bad deal. So you have to make sure everybody wins. And I always say, plan the divorce before you plan the marriage, right? Because when everybody's excited about working together, it's easier to have the conversation that says, if Andre, if in 3 years you want to do something else, how are we going to make this, how are we going to separate? And while you're both excited about the future, it's easy to come up with something that's reasonable. But in the real world, high emotion means low intelligence. So if you wait till you're mad at each other, it's not going to be a pretty picture. And so one of the things, and that's a precursor to answering your question, Mike and I pretty much changed the publishing industry. I know we have a lot of publishers in the room. But when I wrote Rich Dad, mainline publishers said, a financial book needs to be red, black, or green. And I go, that's why I want it to be purple, right? So you go into the few bookstores that are left now, what do you see in the business section? A lot of purple, because we created that brand recognition. And then, so we didn't go with a mainline publisher because they wanted to own the copyright, they wanted to own it in perpetuity. And in 2000, I made it to all the bestseller lists. Rich Dad made New York Times. It stayed on there for 7 years. So all of a sudden, all the publishers came to us. And so we did, they basically paid me $1 million to talk to me about publishing the books. It was not an advance on royalties. It was, they wanted this relationship. So you have to be able to earn the right and bring something to the table that they want. But we were in the last throes of negotiation. We had the call from Oprah, but we knew we could not satisfy the demand of printing and distribution with that kind of publicity. So Warner Books was the final company that won, and they literally printed and distributed 350,000 books before we had a signed contract. That tells you the power of relationship, the power of integrity, and the power of planning together. But what happened was we were the very first joint venture publishing deal ever. We were 50-50. I had access to every department. It was a 5-year term deal. And so we started the idea of joint venture publishing and really opened the opportunity for hybrid publishers. And the publishing world we have today is very different than it was back then. So, but my last day, ready to sign, I'm in this room with 40 people from Warner and me. And their CFO, who was not in the room, said he wouldn't sign off on the deal. Everything was agreed to, but at that time, the publishing industry had a 27% return reserve for every deal they did, which means you don't get 27% of your sales. I did not like that. Our history of returns for Rich Dad was under 1%. And so we almost lost the deal because I just couldn't accept that. And then I finally came into my brain and I said, okay, Mr. CFO, I'll accept your 27% if at the end of the calendar year you true up to actual. And his arrogance said, yeah, sure, I'm going to prove you're wrong, Ms. Letcher. And so we agreed to it. And at December 31, I got $1 million check because our actual return, our actual return was higher than 1%. It was 2% and not 27%. So
that's amazing. So I know when people are newer to partnerships, it's exciting to try to line them up with anyone that will. But as you and I know, only true win-wins are worth anybody's time to begin with. So if you could chat more about what to look for each party to actually be winning. It's like you as a partner, me as a partner, and our audience or communities winning as well.
Well, you obviously want to look at what your product or service offerings are, but more importantly, you want to talk about what your current audiences are. Do they look alike? Do they complement each other? You want to look at what the trajectory is. Party A may have 10 businesses and this is one of them. This might be my whole livelihood. And so there's a different loyalty to the agreement because it's more important to me than to you. And so you have to address those things and talk about it up front and figure out how you're going to resolve. Mike is always, he and I go like this all the time because I'm the entrepreneur. I want to get the job done.
If it's important, it's got to be in writing.
And consider everything that could go wrong and address it up front so that you have a floor plan and you have a map out of how you're going to deal with the discrepancies. You talk about what is the communication plan when you're doing the deal. So are we going to talk weekly? Are we going to talk monthly? Are we going to have in-face meetings to talk about the partnership and what's working and what's not and what we need to adjust? All of those things are so important up front. And particularly if one party is a lot older than the other one, that's an important issue because their stage of life is different, the things that they want out of life. So all those things you have to really come back down to who the individuals are as well as who the businesses are.
Got it. So one of the topics the room expressed a lot of interest in are embedded partnerships, and I'd love for you to share some thoughts on that. One of the ways I like to do embedded partnerships, by the way, what that means is your product, service, or messaging inside of other people's offers. And I like to do that in general with kind of a one-off promotional event to begin with to test how it is to work together. Do we like how each other works, thinks, communicates, follows through? How does it convert to an audience? And when that works well, when you hit it out of the park, then you're like, hey, let's create this so they're integrated. I'd love to hear some examples or a story or two that highlight embedded partnerships that you've helped put together or seen work well.
Well, it's important to have that dry run because then you really figure out how people deal with things. And when there's a crisis, does your partner deal with it in the way that you would want them to deal with it? So it's important to have that kind of thing. And it's also part of the communication process. But having that opportunity to serve others' audiences, what is your intent? Is your intent service or is your intent to draft their people into your database? And that's a huge issue that you need to talk about up front. Right? And so that's something that I talked with all my clients. And that's okay if you want to draft people, but just be honest about it and talk about it so that everybody knows what the intent is. All right, I'm at the stage of my career and my life. I have no desire to draft other people's audiences into my database unless I can be of service to them in a big way. And that's something that is important for you to understand because you're putting your people at risk and you want to make sure that whoever you're bringing in and exposing to that database has earned the right to be in your audience. It's really important to do the due diligence and look at their background and see what they're talking about. I mean, I have a personal prejudice against people that are on stage talking about how to make money that have filed bankruptcy not once but twice, and they're up there talking about how to make money. I go, if you know how to make money, you need to learn how to keep it, how to invest it, and how to grow. I want to hear from somebody who's made it and kept it and helped the world. So again, understanding the background and the really the integrity of the person you want to work with and how you can add value to their people.
Yeah, I think in any partnership, it's always in service of them. And in fact, in negotiating those things, I like to be the complete afterthought. It's all just in benefit to their people. And when you walk into a partnership conversation with that attitude and energy, it makes it way easier to put them together. One of the fastest ways to not line up a partnership is go, hey, you've got a great community. Do you want to promote my stuff? I call that like driving the car straight into the garage. We want to just gently back it in, all in alignment around what matters to them.
Well, you and I are very aligned on that. I think the question is, do you sell or do you serve? And when you sell, it's a transactional relationship. All of a sudden, you now have to find the next person to sell to. When you serve, providing them what they need when they need it, and maybe even before they think they need it, all right, then you create a relationship, which is what you're all about, relationships. And when you create the relationship, you'll end up with a lifetime of sales, lifetime value of a customer. But when the focus is on money, you're not going to be as successful as when your focus is on mission and service.
Yeah, completely agree. So let's talk about value first in relationship building. And this is basically it's the premise we set up for this whole event is as you connect with people and listen to what their goals are and who they're working with, what are specific ways you can provide value first, like resources, connections, things like that? How have you approached that throughout your career? Because I think you're very natural at that whole process.
Well, I have created in my book, 3 Feet from Gold, a personal success equation. Let me just share that because then I'm going to highlight why the answer to your question is P plus T, your passion and your talent. Passion can be do what you love what you do. My passion came from anger because we weren't teaching kids about money in school, and that's as strong today as it was back in 1992 when I dedicated my career to financial education. Talent, I was a CPA for 36 years. I had many, many years in publishing, and so most of us stop there, and we think we have to do everything on our own. But what many of you have already just demonstrated and what you live is they take that times a power of association. Who's on your team? Who's your mentor? Who is strong where you are weak? And that power of association is the strongest element of anybody's success. And then times a, taking action. You know, how many times do we know what we're supposed to do? You just don't do it. Now, that probably doesn't apply to anybody in this room. You're all go-getters. But again, taking action. And then all of it wrapped in faith, plus F, faith. Faith in yourself, faith in what you're doing, faith that is needed and necessary, and faith that you will succeed. And so I do a lot of high-level mentoring, and I always start with that formula because it's usually the power of association that people need help with. They're afraid to ask. You know, I go, well, don't be afraid to ask. Look at it as a compliment. When you want to reach out to somebody, you're basically telling them that you respect them. And then confidence. And they go hand in hand. When you have the right people around you, the right mentor, and you have a bad day, we all have bad days, right? And but they're not going to let you stay there. And so every element of that is important to create true success in your life. And so power of association, sometimes the advisors, the mentors, the people that have gotten you to where you are today may not be the right ones to get you to the next level because they might not have the experience to open those doors for you. But that power of association is so important because why not? That's been my kind of mantra all my life. Why not take the path less traveled? Why not solve a problem, serve a need? All of you are entrepreneurs. You're all solving problems and serving needs. When you focus on that, and that's your primary focus, everything else will fall into line because you're providing a service to people. And so who can help you serve more people? Who can you serve their clients? And that power of association is how you spread around the world. Somebody asked about international, right? You don't have to do it on your own. At the height of Rich Dad's success, $400 million a year, I had 5,000 people working for me, but only 17 on my payroll. I like that because I work CEO to CEO with international publishers around the world. And that is my kind of business. I don't, rather have a CEO to deal with than 5,000 employees. So, but again, how can you encompass what you do and get into another country? Well, you find somebody over there who can benefit from what you're doing. It's, Mike wrote the book, OPM, Other People's Money. OPM is other people's money, other people's time, other people's resources. That's what you're talking about. That's what you want to focus. That's how allows you to grow exponentially quicker than trying to do it on your own. When we had the Talking Children's book, I didn't want to have my own printing plant. So I found one that would do it for me because it was a unique method of printing. When I had Rich Dad, we could not handle the growth. So we brought Warner Warner Books in. They did all the heavy lifting. And all I had to do was, talk to them every once in a while, all right? And so it was, we have been ingrained in this working on our own through school. When you collaborated in school, it was called cheating, all right? But when you get out into the real world, collaboration is the key to success and having the right associations.
So I want to talk more about mentorship and examples of you working with companies to scale. And right before I do, I want to touch on when you're chatting with people here at the event and you hear what they're doing, and maybe you just talk to someone else here at the event that would align. I want you to physically walk over, drag them gently across the room, and introduce them, because I want to share a brief story of the power of that. I was at a traffic and conversion cocktail party, and my friend Kat Merritt drugged me across the room to meet Steve Harwood. And time was winding down, so we just said hi and shared contact information, and that's led to so many opportunities. Steve runs a $100 million company all through embedded partnerships. Like, that's his only traffic source. And he's a world-class human being, like, in how thoughtful he is. In fact, my 14-year-old who's here last year said I wasn't old because I could still ride a half pipe on my skateboard. And then the next week, Steve sent me a skateboard with my Pure JV brand on it to my house. Like, a guy running a $100 million company he ordered that. Like, he figured it out and ordered it. And that thoughtfulness. So that one connection of Kat dragging us across the room has added millions to Steve's business by the connections I've provided. And Steve's introduced me to Russell Brunson and all kinds of other folks, as did David Asarno. Thank you, David Asarno. I got you. So one of your key focus areas now is mentoring folks and advising high-level companies. I'd love to hear, like, who is ideal for you in that work, because all of us can be referral partners for you in that. And I'd love to hear, like, a story or two of someone that you came in, provided your insights, perspectives, and what flourished from that.
Well, I'm sure you've all heard of Grant Cardone. So Grant is a friend of mine, and I've worked with him for years. And then Brandon Dawson is his partner in Cardone Ventures.
That guy's sharp.
Yeah, Brandon, and I knew Brandon when he was building the Audigy company. He sold it for $171 million, and it was a hearing aid company. And I spoke for him, and he was a huge fan of my book, 3 Feet from Gold. And so and I just learned this like 3 years ago. So we're talking 10 years ago this happened. So we're walking down, he's talking to me about how he's built this company, because it's a bunch of like franchises, but he made sure everybody won when he sold it. So it was a really great thing. And he had a plan that he had developed. And I said, well, is that your intellectual property? I kept waiting for somebody to say you wanted to talk about intellectual property. Nobody did that. Anyway, and he said, oh, yeah. Well, little did I know, 3 years ago, he said, yeah, Sharon, I went home that night, formed a company, and put the intellectual property in the company. And so that one conversation in the hall has made him gazillions of dollars, because that's the technology that they're used to build Cardone Ventures, which this year I think is $180 million in revenue. And so you just have to focus on your own assets and understand what you can control. And so back the last time we were here in Cabo, we were at Brandon's wedding up the road a little bit. So, and that's something that, again, asking the questions. As a mentor, it's not telling people what to do, it's asking the questions and discovering the opportunities. Have you thought of, all right, have you considered? Do you know? Understanding what somebody, how they can take where they are and exponentially increase it through your connections. And that's, I try to connect people right and left. I have a client in the UK that was in real estate and speaking, and we created 2 global brands for her. One was her celebrity brand. The other one was a seminar company that's now in 10 countries. And so understanding the methods that you can go through to create your own intellectual property as well as a company's intellectual property is really very important.
And does that head straight into licensing and?
Yes.
Yeah. Because I think of embedded partnerships a lot like licensing. They seem super related where, in this case, taking IP and putting it in someone else's product or service. What are some common models around that? Because to me, they're almost the same thing. They just have different names, but I'd love some clarification on.
Well, as an example, in my world, I have one company that holds all my intellectual property, my books and my other programs. And then I have my financial education company that sells them. So there's a licensing deal between the two, all right, because they're the ones promoting it and marketing it. So they pay a license to the intellectual property company for utilizing it, but they get the benefit of the promotional side. And so again, is how you structure the deal is going to be, it's got to be equitable for both sides. And so even with Brandon, even though he did that, he had to make sure that that company maintained the rights to use that technology because he could just strip it out of the value of the company. All right, so the issue is having the right advice, the right legal counsel to make sure you do it appropriately.
And what's the main advantage to that? Like one entity owning the IP and the distribution and events or trainings versus a company doing the events and distribution, but a separate one holding the IP. What is an advantage to that?
Ownership. So for instance, I have partners in my financial education company, but they're not partners in my intellectual property. And so my intellectual property I can take that and I can leverage that internationally without impacting the distribution company.
So it doesn't get tied up in a single entity.
Plus, when you sell, I can sell my financial education company, but it doesn't include my intellectual property.
See, that's a fire tip right there. I hope you caught that, and I need to take a note on that myself.
Yeah, it includes when I sell my financial education company, it will include a license to my intellectual property because it needs that to continue moving, but not ownership.
And is that typically a per use or like book or training or?
It depends whatever the license says. So for instance, when I built the Rich Dad organization, we had 17 companies. We had a company for international. We had a company for the US. We had a company for the books. We had a different company for coaching, a different company for things because we did different partnerships. So we had a partnership with a coaching company. I didn't want them to have rights in everything else. So we had a separate company for coaching. And that allowed us to maintain the integrity of each of our operations and not commingle it.
Yeah, that's really smart. So if any of you are building a business that you may want to exit in 5 to 10 years or whatever, and then you're creating a separate entity for your IP, because typically you would sell something like that, but you'd still want to, when you got tired of hanging out at the beach for 3 weeks straight, you could start consulting on that or doing side work. So that's a model you might want to write down. So who is an ideal person for you to be serving right now?
Well, we just had a conversation earlier about talking about how I can benefit his audience that needs that basic financial education.
It's a captive audience, right? Yeah, best kind.
Well, one of the strongest sales we had for Rich Dad was prisons. And same thing with Think and Grow Rich. They do a lot of work in prisons. So a chance to rehab, if they understand money, is going to help them a lot more. So, and then I have lots of online programs, but I love to speak. I love to mentor. I love to help people understand. A lot of times I can see things that they can't see because you're inside the business. I've been around a long time. So I've seen a lot of different businesses. I've seen a lot of businesses succeed, and I've seen how they fail. I know a lot of people around the world, and so I have the opportunity to have experience that may help and support businesses taking that next step.
Yeah, which a lot of people in this room could be a great fit for. Show of hands, how many of you have worked with me one-on-one, me and Bill? That's cool. And how many of you have not? Cool. So good opportunity here in the room. So you and I are doing some work together coming up around partnerships. And of course, you've been doing partnerships before I'd heard of the word. I'd love to hear from your perspective. What are some of the reasons that we're going to come in and support you in growing and scaling more? Like, what are some of the drivers as someone who's already been doing this a while?
Well, I want to work with you because of you. I've been around you enough to see that you have a heart of contribution and support, and you have a lot of connections, a lot of people in this room that where you can open doors where I can be of service. So
yeah, and it's always beautiful because it ends up being a two-way street. Where's Jess? Jess is, yeah. So Jess and I were introduced a little while ago, and we jumped on a call. It was actually during a Genius event. I was downstairs. We were teeing up connections back and forth, and it's when you build relationships with other people with amazing networks like you have and Jess and so many in the room, it becomes a two-way street. Like he invited me to a private fireside chat with Damon John and a bunch of other folks that have been on his podcast. You've had the founder of Lululemon and Zoom and 8 or more billionaires. And what's great is he invites me to that. I, in turn, invite Steve Harwood, who I referenced earlier, who lives in your backyard. And it just becomes a two-way pathway for all of us to serve and support and grow, because you've spent years developing your network, and as of you and I, and we can do so much more together. It's a beautiful thing. Like, you introduced me to multiple people there, and I want to thank you for that. And now people there, I'm connecting with VC funding and all kinds of things. It's all through the power of relationships, which in this, like our whole next panel is all around AI, and we can and should be using it, but there's nothing that will ever take the place of building deep relationships. So, and like Steve coming to your event, Steve bought a huge property just to host partners. I fly in to go to your thing. He hands me a 2025 Escalade, a whole place to stay, did all the shopping ahead of time. I'm like, we'll talk about how to treat partners. Like, this is next level. So I'd love to open this up too to questions. Sure. And it's your career and contribution and helping shaping the thinking around finance and business and growth and relationships is profound and beautiful. And I'd love to open it up to questions.
My first question in the spirit of flow is for you. What is your speaking fee? How long do you speak for, and do you do workshops attached? Or, I mean, not attached, but is it just keynotes, workshops, seminars, and how does this work?
Yes,
so I want to be able to help you, but I need clarity.
Yes. I can do, typically I do a keynote that's either 45 minutes to 90 minutes is typically what people want. I do workshops 3 or 4 hours. I also do full day events. And the fee depends on, again, the audience. Typically I'm not the highest price speaker. I usually do domestic events for $20K, international for $35. So, yeah.
And it's first class flights. I know this because she's here.
That's true. Hey, at some point after I turned 50, I decided no more red eyes. And then it was like, okay, about 60, first class. So, yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Yeah, you too.
You were talking about how you need to make sure that when you get into partnership, you already have basically the breakup conversations. So what are maybe 3 to 4 important specific parts of that? Like, what do you exactly want to clarify?
Great question. Great question. First, you ask yourself, how old are you? How old are they? All right, so are you in the same stage of life? If not, you need to address that. Are you both married? What happens if somebody gets divorced? So you need to put in the agreement that you don't want to be a partner with that spouse and that your partner doesn't want to be a partner with your spouse. So you clarify that. Because what happens, a lot of businesses get tangled up in divorce proceedings. And that's, it's an unnecessary thing if you address it up front. You want to look
So
at.
you just say in the contract that that is not possible, and then that.
So you're asking me legal questions, and the legal expert's right here. So, but yes, but you want to address that with your legal team because some states require different languages than others. So it's very important. And some countries require a different language than others. But it's important for you to protect your intellectual property. Is the intellectual property that you're creating owned jointly? Or is it yours? So, because one partner may be bringing the intellectual property, another partner may be bringing the money. So you want to outline what contributions each of you are making, and then what your interest in the relationship is. How are you going to be compensated? And then you want to have a provision that says how often you're going to get together to assess the relationship, to see if adjustments need to be made. And then you want to address.
Adjustments on the setup? Or?
Well, yeah, so you and I do a deal. I'm a lot older than you, all right? And so in 5, yeah, I am. In 5 years, I am not going to be as committed to this business as you are. And yet, I still own 50% of it. And all of a sudden, you're getting a little irritated because you're carrying the load and I'm not. That's why it's important to come back together and talk about it. Now, what happens also in, yeah. And then you also want to say, if, I can't remember what the name of the section is, Mike, help me, where if one of us wants out, okay, all right, we are going to get together, we're going to have an outside party value the company, and we're going to buy the other one out, or we're going to do a buyout plan. But you put it in writing when you're still both excited about the future. There's a term that I use all the time, brightness of future. That's when you want to do the deals and talk about the divorce. When you're both excited about the future, you're much more reasonable. Because if you don't do that in the original agreement, I guarantee you, how many of you have had issues with partners? Yeah, okay. And if you had addressed it early on, it makes things easier. It doesn't mean there's still not going to be litigation or problems, but at least you've set the floor plan of how it's going to be dealt with. And that's important if you end up in arbitration, because they can see that you try to deal with it up front.
Anything else that comes to mind that you feel is important in this divorce conversation?
So there might be, within this agreement, you talk about decisions on expenditures. So maybe one of you, you're not going to make an expenditure over $10,000 or $50,000 without both of you agreeing to it. And that any kind of new partnerships or new deals within the company is going to be mutually agreed upon, unless you choose otherwise. I mean, because there's all different types of relationships. I did a major real estate deal with my best friend. So it's difficult to do business with best friends. So at the beginning, we said, at the end of the day, we're still going to be best friends, no matter what happens. But I provided all the money. She did all the design work and all the work to get this house renovated. And I committed. She had the last word. I, of course, still had to give my input, but she had the last word on the design side. And it worked out great. We made $1 million on the deal, and I kept my mouth shut, and it was perfect. Good thing, which is not easy for me to do. But again, it's always knowing what you want out of the end result of the relationship and what expertise you're each bringing. Because a lot of times you're bringing different levels of expertise, and you need to acknowledge that.
Yeah, that was a great question.
Yeah.
Oh, please.
Yeah.
Most of the disputes that you run
Do you want a
into
mic?
are because of most of the disputes you run into are because of legitimate misunderstandings. And it's because there was some imprecision in your agreement or an absence in the agreement, an omission. So the trick is to sit down right up front and figure out what's important. If it's important to you that the product is red, you need to specify exactly what red you're talking about, because it's a broad spectrum, and there could be legitimate misunderstandings. Okay, you need to define who's going to do what, who has what responsibilities. And if you lay that out very specifically, explicitly in the agreement, you don't have the misunderstandings.
Ask me about work to
So
hire.
you try to get as much detail into the agreement as you can. And you can avoid all of these problems. Now, in terms of structuring entities, you look at risk silos. If you've got one line of business that has risks that are not common with the other lines of businesses that you have, you'd want to put that in a separate entity to protect the other businesses, the other assets from the risks associated with it. That's why you're operating a company, your operating company and your holding company are typically separate. Okay, anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a quick question about work to hire independent contractors. Tell me some
Right,
thoughts
so
on that.
how many of you have used a VA or a photographer so it's so important, and what I see happening in the world today with most younger companies is they get excited, they write the check, they get the photography, but they don't own it. And they get themselves in trouble. So if you have a VA, if you have any independent contractor, Mike told the story about Wendy's last night. This was a perfect example. They did not in the agreement put the fact that it was a work for hire, and once I pay for it, I own it. And I guarantee you, every one of you has something that you've signed that you've given up ownership, and you have to maintain ownership. And so it's really important. That's one of the first things I do with people, go through their contracts. The other thing is, if you're positioning your company for sale, make sure that any customer contracts that you have are transferable on sale. Because what happens is you want to sell your company for $100 million, and they come in and they really want Boeing, and Boeing's a big client of yours. They come in and the Boeing contracts don't transfer on sale. That sale gets blown up. So it's really important to position yourself for sale, to make sure you have all of those agreements done. Same thing in today's world. Social media is everything, or people get all excited because they got 1 million followers, but you don't own those names. So you need to nurture them home, because the value of your company is in your the database. And many companies sell for their database. So it's really important to use social media for lead generation, but to bring those people into your database to increase the value of your company.
Yeah, so as we wrap up here, what are some final thoughts to impart around partnerships, value, like any juicy thing you'd love to share with us?
Well, everybody say, why not? Why not? We are raised to think a certain way. Our life experiences makes us think a certain way. So I always challenge everybody with the question, why not? Why not do something different? Why not take the path less traveled? Why not explore a new partnership? And then I always follow it up with, our kids today, they get into this routine in school, and they stop being curious and creative because they're following a system. And what happens is that we, as young adults, we do that. We get into our career, we get comfortable, we get complacent, and we're just kind of sifting through life. And then we have a crisis. Our life goes into chaos, and how do we get out of it? By becoming creative and curious again. And so I always challenge people, when was the last time you did something for the first time? Ask yourself that. When was the last time you did something for the first time? I challenge myself, Mike and I do that all the time, it keeps you young, it keeps you curious, it keeps you creative, and it allows you to continue meeting new people. All right, we all live in our comfort zone where you can't make new partnerships and new associations inside your comfort zone. So you have to take that first step sometimes the hardest. But by stepping out and starting meeting new groups, you have new opportunities. And then there's a why not support them, why not give first, receive second. My dad raised me every night saying, Sharon, did you add value to someone's life today? If you have kids, I highly suggest you do that. He's been gone 20 years, but I still ask myself that every night. Focus on the mission, focus on service, and the sales will come.
Beautiful. One more question.
Well, you just kind of answered it. So I knew your name, but I didn't know your story. And as I'm listening to you, I'm so inspired. You're so beautiful. You're a trailblazer. You swum upstream. I have a background in the publishing industry as well and access to big 5 publishers. And I'm constantly saying to people, the experts aren't always right. And the biggest isn't always the best for what you're saying, the control and the way they dictate things that, sometimes you got to go a different path. So I really appreciate that. And then I was just going to ask you kind of how that was instilled into you being, a female in the industry, coming in as with your background, but obviously you were raised that way. But who influenced you the most and shaped your mindset for business?
Well, certainly my father, big time, and God. I still remember I was embarrassed by where I lived. My parents were very entrepreneurial. We lived in a little tiny house between my mom's beauty shop and my dad's used car lot. And we had real estate properties, one of which, Orange Grove, we got cash flow from oranges. And it's now part of SeaWorld. We had 3-2 rentals. I had to scrub out bathrooms between tenants at 10. I hated it. I swore I'd never be an entrepreneur. My friends' parents were CEOs and military officers. And so I was the first generation to go to college, only woman in my accounting classes, only woman in most of my business classes, one of the very first women in public accounting in the United States. Started in Atlanta, Georgia, hot Atlanta. So I was young, single, Atlanta. Beautiful thing, except it wasn't, because at 25, I was working 80 hours a week. All of a sudden, my parents started looking a lot smarter. In fact, those of you with teenagers, just wait, you're gonna be a lot smarter in their eyes. But, and I had a client offer me to leave public accounting and buy a company with him. And that's when I met this guy. But I went back to my condo and I had back then it was before PCs, before cell phones. I know dinosaur days for you guys, but I had the old yellow legal pad and pros and cons, and it didn't help me a bit. I could argue both sides, but my hand just took across and said, why not? And that's when I secured that mantra for myself, and I still use it every single day. Why not do something different? Why not serve a need? Don't go with the flow, or you'll go over the cliff. Yes, go. Yeah, that's true. Sorry. Create your own flow. No, you create your own flow.
Hey guys, 1, 2, 3. There we go.
Will you send that to me, please?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
So thank you guys. I appreciate it.